There's a weld inside every tank you've ever driven past that you will never see. A seam buried under paint and steel, holding back 1,000,000 gallons. Nobody thinks about it. Nobody thinks the man who laid it. Until the day it lets go. My name is Roy Petrick, and I spent 31 years making sure that day never came. Then a man in clean boots told me I was a dime a dozen. Wherever you're watching from tonight, a truck cab, a kitchen table, a job site, on break, pull up a chair. This one's about the work nobody sees and the price of pretending it doesn't matter. Stick around. Steel keeps its own kind of score. A good weld is invisible. That's the first thing I ever tell an apprentice, and most of them don't understand it for years. They want the fat, shiny bead you can photograph. They want the stack of dimes you post on the internet. And that's fine, that's pretty, but pretty isn't the job. The job is the part you can't see, the root passed down in the joint, where two pieces of steel become one piece of steel, where there's no gap for a molecule to snake through, no slag hiding like a lie waiting to be found. You can't see it. That's the whole point. If I did my work right, you will live your entire life never knowing my name. And the tank will just stand there in the sun, full and quiet and safe, and the fuel that heats your house in January will have passed through steel I sealed with my own 2 hands. I'm 54 years old. My knuckles don't close all the way anymore. There's a burn scar on my right forearm shaped like the state of Florida from a slag pop in 1998 that went down inside my glove, and I remember the job it happened on, and I remember it held. I've got a permanent squint from 31 years of arc light even through the hood, and my hearing shot in the high range from grinders, and my back tells me the weather 2 days out. None of that is complaint. That's just the receipt. That's what the work costs, and I paid it gladly because I was good. I want to be plain about that, because a modest man and an honest man can't always be the same man, and tonight I'm going to be honest. I was one of the best combination welders on the Gulf Coast. Stick, TIG, flux core, uphill, overhead, in a coffin-tight space with a mirror because you can't get your head where your hands need to go. I could do all of it, and I could do it to code, and I could do it when it was 104 degrees inside a tank and the sweat was running into my eyes. I say all this not to brag. I say it because a man told me I was nothing special, and everything that came after proved him wrong in a way I'd never have chosen. So let me tell you how the steel kept score. I came to the Harmon Point Terminal in 1993, 23 years old, with a fresh certification and more confidence than since. The terminal sat out on a spit of flat land, where the river met the bay 40-some storage tanks. Big white drums standing in rows like a city with no people in it, connected by a nervous system of pipe. Crude came in, product went out, and in between it all sat in those tanks waiting, and the tanks had to hold. That was the whole religion of the place. The tanks have to hold. An old hand named Gus Wozniak took one look at my test coupon that first week and grunted, which I later learned was the highest praise Gus was capable of. He took me under his wing the way those old men did, by insulting me constantly and never once explaining why, so that you had to figure it out or quit. I didn't quit. I learned to read a joint the way you read a person's face. I learned that steel has a memory, that it moves when it's hot and remembers where it wanted to go when it's cool, and that a good welder doesn't fight that. He plans for it. 31 years. I welded on those tanks through 4 ownership changes and 6 terminal managers and 1 hurricane that tipped the roof off the maintenance shop. I did new construction and I did repairs and I did the ugly emergency call-outs at 2 in the morning when a seam started weeping and the whole terminal held its breath. I trained 11 apprentices and 9 of them are still in the trade, and 2 of them make more money than I ever did, and I'm proud of that in a way I can't quite explain to people who don't do this. The paperwork side grew over the years: welding, procedure, specifications, procedure qualification records, the whole documented gospel of how a joint gets made and proven. Some of the younger guys hated it. I didn't. That paperwork is just the trade writing down what it learned the hard way, usually after somebody died. Every rule in that book is somebody's tombstone. I respected it. By 2024, I was the senior welder on the terminal. Not a title anybody printed on a card, just a fact everybody knew. When a job was critical, when it was a tank going back into service holding product under a head of pressure, they wanted Petrick on the route, because the tanks have to hold, and I'd never once let one fail. Not once. Remember that. Trevor Denning arrived in the spring, and I knew what he was before he ever shook my hand. I don't say that to sound wise. Any man my age has met 100 Trevor Dennings, They come out of the corporate side, not the field, and they've got a way of walking through a plant like they're on a factory tour, nodding at things they don't understand. He was maybe 38, dressed in the kind of gear that's designed to look like work clothes, without ever having done any work, boots with no scuffs. A hard hat with the corporate logo still glossy, a tablet and a rugged case he carried like a clipboard he'd seen in a movie. Terminal Operations Manager, that was the title. He'd been brought in, we heard, to optimize. That's a word that always makes a field hand's stomach drop, because in 31 years, I have never once seen optimize mean make safer or make better. It means make cheaper, and it means somebody upstairs wants a number to go down so they can put it in a slide. He gathered the crews that first week and gave a speech about efficiency and metrics and being lean, and he used the word synergy without any apparent shame. And I watched the older guys stare at the ground and the younger guys nod along. And I thought, well, we'll see. Maybe he'll learn. Some of them do. The plant has a way of teaching you humility if you let it. Trevor didn't let it. The first real friction came over the tank refit tank 12, a big one, due to come out of a long service run and get inspected, repaired, and hydro-tested before it went back into rotation. Standard work. Serious work. The kind of job I'd done 30 times. I put together my estimate, my crew, my timeline, the whole thing, and I sat across a desk from Trevor Denning while he frowned at it on his tablet. These labor numbers, he said, tapping the screen. Your rate, the senior welder premium. He said it like it was a typo. That's a lot of money for guys standing around with a torch. I didn't say anything. I've learned that silence makes men like Trevor keep talking, and they usually tell you exactly what they think, if you just wait. I've got contract crews, he said. That'll do this whole scope for less than half of what your in-house numbers come to. Certified guys. Modern. I ran the comps. He turned the tablet toward me like the spreadsheet was going to change my mind. The market's soft. There's a lot of welders out there hungry for work. There's a lot of welders, I agreed. There's not a lot of welders you want on the root of a tank that's going to hold product. He smiled at me. Not a mean smile. Worse than mean. A patient one, the kind you give a man you've decided is old and doesn't get it. It's welding, Roy, he said. It's not brain surgery. I left his office that day and stood out on the tank farm in the wind for a while, looking at the rows of white drums I'd spent my whole adult life keeping whole, and I had a feeling in my gut I hadn't had in years. Not anger, something colder, a sense that the man in the clean boots was about to learn something the hard way, and that a lot of people were going to pay the tuition. I just didn't know yet that the first payment was going to be me. It happened on a Tuesday, out on the tank farm in front of half the crew. I've thought about that a lot since that. He did it out there instead of in his office. An office firing is a private thing, a closing of a door. Doing it out on the farm, in the open, with men within earshot, was a choice. I think he wanted it seen. I think he wanted a demonstration. He came out mid-morning with 2 of the contract crew trailing him and a rolled-up set of prints under his arm. I was up on the scaffold at Tank 12, laying out the repair scope on a section of shell plate where the old inspection had flagged some thinning. I climbed down when he called my name because that's what you do, and I stood there with my hood pushed back and my gloves in my hand. Roy, he said, loud enough, I'm going to save us both some time. I've made a decision on the refit. I'm going with the contract crew for the full scope. Their number came in where I needed it. And frankly, I'm restructuring the in-house maintenance roster to match the new budget. I stood there. I felt the crew going still around us, the way a shop goes quiet when a grinder stops. You're laying me off, I said. I'm eliminating the senior welder position, he said like there was a difference. It's redundant with the contract model. Just numbers, Roy. Nothing personal. Now, I've been let go before in the lean years and the downturns. It happens in this trade. It's never good, but it's not always ugly. This was ugly, and I think he needed it to be because when I didn't blow up, when I just stood there and took it, something in him wanted more. He wanted me to understand that I was small. 31 years, I said, not begging, just laying it on the table. And he smiled that patient smile, and he said the thing, and he said it loud. Look, I appreciate the tenure. I do. But let's be real. He gestured out at the tank farm, at the whole terminal, like a man showing off something he owned. Burners are a dime a dozen, Roy. Anybody with a torch and a certification card can run a bead. I can find 10 of you standing outside the hall tomorrow morning for 2/3 the rate. The trade's changed. You're paying for a skill the market doesn't price the way it used to. A dime a dozen. I've turned that phrase over in my hands 1,000 times since. Such a small, cheap thing to say. And you know what got me? Standing there in the sun with the crew watching wasn't rage. I kept waiting for the rage. I kept waiting for the rage, and it didn't come. What came was a kind of grief, because I looked at this man, and I understood that he genuinely did not know what he did not know. He was standing on ground made safe by 31 years of my invisible work, and he could not see it, and he never would. And he was about to hand the most critical joint on that terminal to men chosen by a spreadsheet. I looked at the contract guys behind him. Young, not bad kids, I could tell that much just from how they held themselves. A little nervous, a little green. They wouldn't meet my eye, they knew. Whatever Trevor didn't know, they at least half knew. Okay, I said, that's all, okay. I think he expected more. I think a part of him wanted a scene so he could be right about me being difficult and old and past it. But I buried a father and I stood on a burning platform in a hurricane. And Trevor Denning was not going to be the thing that broke my composure. You'll get your final check in your accrued time, he said, a little off balance now. HR will call you. I know how it works, I said, one thing, and I nodded up at tank 12, at the shell plate I'd been laying out. That section's thinner than the old report says. Whoever routes that, tell them to run a real fit-up and back-purge the critical joints and don't rush the hydro. That tank's had a hard life. She'll test you. He gave a little laugh. I'll pass it along. He didn't. I know he didn't. But I said it. I want that on the record. I told him. Whatever came after, I stood on that scaffold and I told him the truth, and he laughed. I climbed down the rest of the way, and I walked across the tank farm to the maintenance shop, with the whole crew watching me go, and I did not look back at tank 12. I didn't need to. I already knew what she was going to do. It's 40 minutes from Harmon Point to my house, and I don't remember most of that drive. I remember the security gate, and old Ernie in the guard shack lifting a hand at me the way he had 10,000 times, not knowing it was the last time, and me lifting mine back. I remember the highway and the refineries flaring off in the distance and the radio playing something I didn't hear. And I remember pulling into my own driveway at 11 in the morning on a Tuesday, which is a thing that had happened maybe 5 times in 31 years, and just sitting there in the truck. Diane came out on the porch. She knew something was wrong from the hour of it. 30 years married, you can read a man's whole day from the way he parks. I got out, and I stood there in the driveway, and my throat did a thing I wasn't ready for. 54 years old, and I had to work to keep my voice level. Trevor let me go, I said. The whole senior welder thing, gone. He's going contract. She came down the steps. She didn't say anything cheap, my wife. She didn't say it's fine or you'll land on your feet or any of the things people say to fill the silence. She just came and stood in front of me and put her hand flat on my chest over the pocket of my work shirt and looked at me. What did he say? She asked. Because she knew there was a what he said. There's always a what he said. Said burners are a dime a dozen. I heard how it sounded out loud in my own driveway, and I let out a breath that was almost a laugh but wasn't. Said anybody with a torch can do what I do. I watched something move through her face. She's got a temper, my wife. And for a second it was there. Then she put it away, because she saw I didn't have room for hers on top of mine. Roy, she said, look at me. That man doesn't know what a weld is. He doesn't know what you do. You know why he doesn't know? Because you did it so well for 31 years that nothing ever went wrong, so he thinks nothing ever could. She tapped my chest once, hard. That's not a dime a dozen. That's the opposite of a dime a dozen. That's the whole reason he still has a terminal to run. I thought about a lot of things I've built in my life, but I don't think I ever built anything better than the marriage that put that woman on my porch that Tuesday. We went inside. She made coffee even though it was almost lunch. We sat at the kitchen table, and I let the day settle, and somewhere in there the grief turned over into something quieter and more solid. Not revenge. I want to be clear about that, because this is the part people get wrong. I did not drive home wanting Tank 12 to fail. I have never in my life wanted a tank to fail. A tank failing is a nightmare I'd spent 3 decades preventing. But a cold, level part of me, the part that had read that thinning shell plate with my own eyes, knew what a green crew and a rushed schedule and a manager who laughs at warnings was going to add up to. And that part of me sat at the kitchen table, drinking coffee I didn't want, and it was already keeping score. They let me back on the property one time the next morning to clear out my gear. Trevor made sure someone walked me the whole time like I might steal a wrench after 31 years. I didn't take it personal. It was policy, and policy is just fear with a form number. Here's the thing people don't understand about a tradesman and his tools. My rig wasn't the company's. The good stuff never is. My hood atop shelf auto-darkening hood. I'd broken in over years until it fit my face like it grew there. My leads, coiled the particular way I coil them, over-under, so they pay out clean and never kink. My grinders, my clamps, my little mirror on the telescoping handle for seeing around corners into joints. God never meant a man to reach. My gauges, my soapstone worn down to a nub. The whole kit a man assembles over a career, each piece bought with a reason, each one a small argument I'd won with the steel over the years. I packed it slow and careful. I didn't throw anything. I've seen men clear out mad, banging their boxes, making a show, and I understand it, but it wasn't for me. I coiled every lead the right way. I wound them clean, and I strapped them, and I set them in the truck bed like I was going to a job, not leaving one. Because the leads didn't do anything wrong. The steel didn't do anything wrong. My hands didn't do anything wrong. Whatever was broken at Harmon Point, it wasn't in my toolbox, and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise by treating my own gear like garbage. The contract crew was already out on Tank 12. I could see them from the shop door as I loaded up on the scaffold, setting up to route that section of shell plate I'd flagged. I watched for a minute. I didn't want to. You can't watch a man do your trade for 31 years and then just not look. They weren't terrible, I'll say that. The kid running the route had decent hands, I could tell from the way he moved. But they were fast. Too fast. Nobody was checking the fit up the way that plate needed. Nobody was purging the way that joint deserved. And there was a foreman down below on a phone, and I could read the whole scene like a page. A schedule pushed too tight by a manager who'd promised corporate a number, and a young crew being told to make it happen, and a critical joint being treated like a fence post. The escort cleared his throat. Time to go. I took one last look at Tank 12 at 40 years of steel, about to be trusted to a joint laid in a hurry by men who didn't know her history, and I got in my truck, and I drove out through the gates, and Ernie lifted his hand, and this time I knew she was going to test them, and they weren't ready. Walt Brennan called me Thursday night. Word travels in this business faster than any pipeline. Walt and I go back to the Gus Wozniak days. He spent 40 years as an inspector, the API kind. The ones who crawl the tanks with a flashlight and an ultrasonic gauge and a clipboard. The ones whose whole job is to find the thing that's going to kill somebody before it does. He retired 3 years ago, and now he mostly fishes and complains about the government. But a man like Walt never really stops inspecting. He still reads the world for defects. "Heard Denning cut you loose," he said. "No hello." Walt doesn't do hello. He did. Dime a dozen, I heard he said. Walt made a sound in his throat like he'd tasted something off. In front of the crew. In front of the crew. There was a silence on the line, and I knew Walt was working something over, the way he'd work over a suspect weld, tapping around the edges of it. "Roy," he said finally, "what's the schedule on 12? I told him what I knew. The scope, the contract crew, the timeline Trevor had bragged about. Walt listened, and I could almost hear him doing the arithmetic that men like us do without thinking. The arithmetic of how long a thing takes if you do it right, measured against how long they've given. "That's not enough time," Walt said. "Not for that tank. I inspected 12, 2019, the last big internal. You remember what I found? You flagged the shell course, the thinning, the old repair from way back. The whole lower belt of that tank is tired," Walt said. "She's held because she's been babied, because guys like you knew her and treated her like she was tired. You put a green crew on a tired tank and rushed the schedule, and then you put water in her for the hydro test." He stopped. "You know what a hydro test is, Roy. You've run 100. But let me say it out loud for whoever's listening, because people forget. That's Walt. Even on the phone, he lectures. You fill the tank with water," he said, "because water's heavy and it's safer than testing with product. And you fill her up and you let that column of water push out on every weld, every seam, every plate, harder than the product ever will in service. It's the moment of truth. It's when the tank tells you the truth about herself, whether you want to hear it or not. A good hydro is boring. A good hydro, nothing happens. You watch the water and the gauges for hours, and you get to go home. But a bad joint, he let it hang. A bad joint on a tired shell with a full head of water pushing on it. That's not a leak, Roy. That's not a drip you catch and grind out. That's a split. That's the plate letting go all at once. I stood in my kitchen with the phone against my ear, and I felt the cold thing in my gut turn over again. I told him, I said quietly. I told Trevor. Run the fit up. Back purge the criticals. Don't rush the hydro. I told him to his face. And he laughed, Walt said. It wasn't a question. He knew the type too. He laughed. Walt was quiet a long moment. Then he said the thing that stayed with me, the thing an old inspector understands in his bones. Steel doesn't care what a spreadsheet says, Roy. Steel doesn't know what anybody's rate is. Water finds the weakest joint every single time. It's the most honest thing in the world, a hydro test. It can't be argued with. It can't be charmed. It can't be optimized. A dry, tired laugh. That tank's going to give Trevor Denning an inspection he can't ignore. And there won't be a thing you or I can do about it, because we won't be there. No, I said, we won't. You did right, Walt said, gentler now. You warned him. That's all a man can do. After that, it's between him and the water. Here's the thing Trevor Denning would never have believed. My phone started ringing before my final check even cleared. The Gulf Coast is a small world, if you're good, and 31 years of clean work is a reputation that walks into rooms ahead of you. By the end of that first week, 3 outfits had called. A fabrication shop up in Pasadena that did pressure vessels. A pipeline contractor that needed a senior hand who could run TIG on the criticals and sign off on the young guys. And a specialty shop that did nothing but the hard, weird, dangerous repairs. Nobody else would touch the exact work I was best at. I want to tell you what that did to me, because it mattered more than the money. For a week I'd been carrying Trevor's sentence around in my chest. Dime a dozen. Anybody with a torch. And a small, ugly voice, the one we all have, had been whispering that maybe he was right. Maybe I was just an old man who'd gotten comfortable. Maybe the market really had passed me by and I was expensive and replaceable and past it. That voice is a liar, but it's a persuasive liar, especially at 3 in the morning. Then the phone rang, and it kept ringing, and every call was a man on the other end who knew exactly what I was worth. The fab shop owner, a guy named Dell I'd known for 20 years, put it plain. Roy, I've been trying to poach you off Harmon Point for a decade. The day I heard you were free, I about drove to your house. When can you start? Not a dime a dozen. The opposite, just like Diane said. I took my time. I didn't grab the first thing. And somewhere in that week of phone calls, I made myself a promise, a boundary. I guess you'd call it now, though I just thought of it as a line I wasn't going to cross again. I was never again going to spend 31 years making myself indispensable to a man who'd tell me I was interchangeable. I was going to work for people who knew what I was, and I was going to walk the day they forgot. I took Dell's offer. The pressure vessel shop. Cleaner work, mostly indoors. More TIG and less coffin space, better on my back and my knees. Good people who understood that the slow, careful pass is the cheap one in the end, because you only pay for it once. I started the following Monday, and it felt, I'll be honest, it felt like being remembered, like walking back into a place where the language I'd spoken my whole life was still spoken. I was standing at a bench that Monday afternoon, laying a root pass on a vessel head, in the zone, in that quiet place where it's just me and the puddle and the steel, when my phone buzzed in my back pocket. I ignored it. You don't stop a rude pass for a phone. But it buzzed again, and again, and a fourth time. And when I finally finished the pass and set down my torch and pulled out my phone, I saw the messages, and I understood, before I even read them, that the water had found the weakest joint. I wasn't there. I need you to remember that. Everything I'm about to tell you, I heard secondhand from Walt, from a couple of the crew who stayed friends with me, from the incident report that made the rounds later the way those reports always do. I wasn't there. My hands were clean 3 counties away, laying a root pass on a vessel head at Dell's shop. But I've run enough hydro tests that I can see it like I was standing on the dike. They rushed the whole refit. Everybody said so. Trevor had promised corporate the tank back in service by a date that never had room in it for doing the job right. And when the schedule slipped, because schedules always slip, when the steel doesn't cooperate, instead of pushing the date, he pushed the crew. The green crew rooted that tired shell course fast. No proper back purge on the criticals. Fit-up gaps closed by force instead of care, and the inspection that should have caught it got compressed too, because inspection costs time, and time was the one thing Trevor had spent already. There's a thing that happens with a bad root pass: you don't purge right and don't inspect right. You get a defect down in the joint porosity, lack of fusion, a place where the two pieces of steel never really became one piece of steel. And on the surface it can look fine. It can look beautiful. It can pass a glance. But it's a lie. And it's a lie that's holding back whatever you put in that tank. The morning of the hydro test, by every account, was routine. Clear day. They started filling tank 12 with water. Slow, the way you're supposed to. You don't just blast it full. You bring the level up in stages and you hold and you watch. And for a while, nothing happened. Walt was right. A good hydro is boring. Hour after hour, the water climbing, the gauges, reading true, men standing around, drinking coffee. But this wasn't a good hydro. This was a tired shell and a rush root and a defect nobody had caught. And as the water climbed, the pressure on that lower belt climbed with it. Thousands of tons of water, pushing out in every direction with a patience nothing man-made can match. Pushing on the good welds, which held, because most welds do, and pushing on the bad joint. Pushing and finding it. It didn't drip. Walt told me it didn't drip. And that's the part that tells you everything. A good tank that's just barely failing weeps first, gives you a warning, a wet spot, a chance. Tank 12 didn't weep because it wasn't a marginal joint slowly giving up. It was a bad weld under full load, and when it went the way Walt said it would. It split. The lower shell course let go along the bad seam, and 1,000,000 gallons of water came out of that tank in a matter of minutes. Not a leak, a wall of water. It blew out across the containment, overwhelmed the dike, and flooded the low end of the terminal. The pump houses, the electrical, the pipe racks, the offices, vehicles floated. The control room took water. Men ran for high ground, and thank God nobody was standing at the base of that shell when it split. Because if they had been, I wouldn't be telling you a story about money and pride. I'd be telling you a story about the funeral. That's the part that's never satisfying, no matter how the rest of it plays. It came that close. A rush schedule and a laughed-off warning came that close to killing somebody, and the only reason it didn't was luck, and luck is not a safety program. The terminal was down. Fully down. And every single person who looked at what happened asked the same first question. Who welded that joint? And who decided to put them on it? The messages I ignored during my route pass were from 3 different people, and they all said some version of the same thing. 12 failed on hydro. Whole terminals flooded. You hear? I stood in the middle of Dell's shop reading them, and I want to tell you I felt triumphant, because that's the story people want. The clean shot of justice, the fist in the air. But that's not what I felt. What I felt, first, standing there with my hood pushed back, was a drop in my stomach. The old reflex of 31 years, the tank failed alarm that lived in my body. For one full second I was already moving. Already thinking, who's hurt? Get the crew. Where's the breach? Before I remembered, it wasn't mine anymore. It wasn't my terminal. It wasn't my emergency. Nobody was calling me to fix it. And then, underneath that, slow and cold, came the other thing. Not joy, vindication, which is a different animal. Joy is loud and it fades. Vindication is quiet and it just sits there in your chest, heavy and permanent, like a good weld. I called Walt that night. You heard, he said. I heard. Nobody hurt. That's the mercy of it. 2 guys got knocked around by the water, cuts and a busted arm, but nobody's dead. Which is more than that operation deserved. Walt's voice had the grim satisfaction of an old inspector whose warnings had been ignored one time too many. It's bad, Roy. The electrical shot, control room flooded. They're looking at the terminal being down for weeks, maybe longer. Environmental's crawling all over it because some of that water picked up product residue on its way through and got into the drainage before they could contain it. There's going to be fines. There's going to be a state investigation. There's going to be an insurance fight that lasts years. I let that settle. And Denning, I asked. Walt laughed, but there was no humor in it. Trevor Denning stood in front of the corporate people yesterday and had to explain how a routine refit turned into a flooded terminal and a regulatory event. And you know what the very first thing they pulled was? The decision log. Who approved the contract crew? Who set the schedule? who signed off on cutting the in-house senior welder to hit a budget number. Walt paused, and I could feel him savoring it, and I didn't blame him one bit. There's a paper trail, Roy. There's always a paper trail. He optimized his way right into being the only name on every document that mattered. He wanted the win, I said. He wanted a number to show corporate. He got a number, Walt said. It's just got a lot more zeros than the one he was planning on, and it's on the wrong side of the ledger. We didn't gloat. Two old men on the phone. We mostly talked about the thing that actually scared us. How close it came. How a busted arm was almost a body bag. How the trade keeps learning the same lesson in blood, because men in clean boots keep deciding the lesson doesn't apply to them. That's the real story, and it's not satisfying, and it's true. But I'd be lying if I said I slept badly that night. I slept fine. Diane asked me in the dark if I was all right, and I said I was, and I was. Trevor Denning called me 11 days after the flood. I almost didn't recognize the number. When I heard his voice, I actually had to sit down, not from nerves, but from the sheer improbability of it, the same voice that had stood on the tank farm and told me I was a dime a dozen, now coming through my phone in my own kitchen, and I could hear it right away before he said anything real. The confidence was gone. The patient smile you could always hear in his voice, even over the phone, gone. He sounded like a man standing in a flooded building. "Roy," he said, "it's Trevor Denning from Harmon Point. I know who it is." A silence. He'd expected me to make it easy, I think, the way I'd made his firing easy by not making a scene. He was learning that easy and beaten aren't the same thing. "I'm sure you heard about 12, he said. "I heard. It's been a hell of a couple weeks. We're in a real bind out here. The whole terminal's down. We've got remediation. We've got the state. We've got—" He stopped, gathered himself, went to the thing he'd called to say. "Look, I'll be straight with you. I need experienced hands. I need somebody who knows these tanks, who knows the history, who can help us get through the repairs and get the terminal back up. Somebody the inspectors will trust. And there's nobody who knows Harmon Point like you do. A breath. I want to bring you back, senior welder, your old rate more than your old rate, whatever it takes. We need you back, Roy." There it was, the table turned all the way over. I sat in my kitchen and I looked out the window at my truck in the driveway, my leads coiled clean in the bed, and I thought about a lot of things in the space of a few seconds. I thought about 31 years. I thought about the crew watching me walk across the tank farm. I thought about Diane's hand flat on my chest. I thought about the boundary I'd drawn for myself, the line I said I'd never cross again. And I thought about what I felt, which was not the hot rush of a comeback speech I'd imagined in the ugly 3 a.m. hours right after the firing, saying something cutting to this man. I'd rehearsed a few zingers I'm not proud of, but sitting there with the real chance in my hand. I didn't want any of them. They were beneath the moment. They were beneath the work. "Trevor," I said, "I'm going to tell you no. But I'm going to tell you why, because I think you should hear it, and I don't think anybody else is going to say it to you plain. Roy, let me finish. You stood on the tank farm and you told me burners are a dime a dozen, and you believed it. You believed the only thing I brought was a torch and a card, and that you could get that anywhere cheaper. So you did, and the tank told you the truth. Not me, I never touched that joint. I was 3 counties away. The water told you. Water can't be optimized, Trevor. It finds the weakest thing every single time, and it doesn't care what anybody's rate is." He didn't say anything. "What I brought for 31 years wasn't the torch," I said. "You can hire a torch. What I brought was knowing which tank was tired and which joint would test you, and when to slow down even though the schedule said hurry. That's the part you can't see, so you decided it wasn't real. It cost you a terminal to find out it was real. I wasn't angry saying it. That surprised me. I was just laying steel. So no, I won't come back, not because I want you to hurt. Because I made myself a promise I'd never again work for a man who couldn't tell the difference between what's expensive and what's valuable. And you can't. Not yet. Maybe someday, I hope so. But not yet." There was a long quiet on the line. "I'll send you some names, though," I said, gentler. "Good hands, real ones who can help you dig out. They'll cost you, but cheap is what got you here. You take care, Trevor." And I hung up, and I sat there a minute. And then I went out to the garage, and I sharpened my soapstone and got my gear ready for the morning, because I had real work to do at a place that knew what I was. I'm at Dill's shop now. Been the better part of a year. It's good work. Pressure vessels, mostly, the kind of joints where the tolerance is unforgiving and the paperwork is a religion, which suits me fine. I've got my own bench in a corner where the light's good. The young guys come by to watch me run a route sometimes, and I insult them a little the way Gus insulted me, and I explain nothing. Because the trade should cost them something to learn, same as it cost me. One of them's got real hands. I'll make a welder out of him. Harmon Point is running again, last I heard. Took them months and a fortune, and the state settlement is still grinding along, and the insurance fight is exactly the years-long mess Walt said it would be. Trevor Denning isn't there anymore. I don't know all the details, and I didn't go looking. Some things you don't need to watch to know how they end. The decision log had his name on every line that mattered, and corporate needed a name, and he'd made himself the only one. He optimized his way right off the property. I don't take joy in it. I'll be honest and say I don't lose sleep over it either. I think about that phrase still, dime a dozen. And here's what I've landed on, after a year of turning it over. He was right, in a way that didn't help him at all. There are a lot of welders. The halls are full of men and women with torches and certification cards, hungry for work, and the market is soft. And if all you need is a bead run, you really can find 10 of us on a corner tomorrow. Trevor wasn't wrong about the supply. He was wrong about what he was buying. Because the thing that's rare was never the torch. It was never even the skill, exactly, though that takes years. The thing that's rare is the man who's laid enough steel to know when the steel is lying to him. The judgment, the care, the willingness to slow down when everyone's yelling to hurry because you've seen what hurry does. You can't buy that by the dozen at any price. And you don't even know you needed it until the day the water finds the joint and the whole terminal goes under. That's the part nobody sees. That's the weld you can't see. And it's worth everything, right up until the moment it's gone, and then it's worth even more. And by then it's too late. So here's what I've got for you, whoever you are, watching from wherever you are tonight. If you're the one doing the invisible work, the careful thing nobody thanks you for, the pass laid right down on the joint where no one will ever look you, know your worth, even when no one's pricing it. Don't let a man in clean boots tell you what you are. And if you're ever the one in the clean boots, holding the spreadsheet, deciding what's fat to trim, be very, very careful about the things you can't see. They're usually the ones holding everything up. The tanks have to hold. That was always the whole religion of it. And somebody has to be the one who knows how to make them. That somebody was never a dime a dozen. My name is Roy Petrick. Thanks for sitting with me.